They marched into the fog like men guided by a higher command. Not one hesitated, not one looked back. 234 Confederate soldiers, trained, armed, hardened by war, disappeared into the dense woods of Shenandoah and were never seen again. No blood, no bodies, no survivors, only silence. The forest gave no explanation. The war blamed the chaos. The records, buried beneath layers of conflicting reports and sealed letters. But there's a reason you've never heard what happened that night. A reason it's been scrubbed from official history and whispered only in back rooms of old Virginian lodges. You see, those men were chosen, not for a mission, but for an experiment. It wasn't about battle tactics or enemy lines. It was about control, the kind of control that strips men down to their souls and rebuilds them from fear. And it didn't start with the Civil War. It started long before, beneath ancient soil, under foreign banners, under the name of empires that vanished but never truly died. The vanishing battalion of Shenandoah wasn't a mystery. It was a message, a test, a silent ritual of power performed in the guise of military strategy. And if you think that sounds too far-fetched, ask yourself, why did the most documented war in American history fail to account for 234 trained soldiers? Why did the Confederate leadership issue no public inquiry? Why was every officer on duty that night promoted, reassigned, or quietly discharged within weeks? You weren't supposed to ask these questions, but you're here now. And once you've begun this descent, there is no turning back. Because this isn't just a story about a vanishing battalion. This is about the ancient mechanisms of psychological warfare, the kind designed not to defeat you in battle, but to erase you from history. You've been living in a version of reality written by the victors of secret wars, and tonight, we tear that version apart. One revelation at a time. Let's begin. The Shenandoah Valley was no ordinary battlefield. Beneath its picturesque hills and winding creeks lies a geography of ritual, a land soaked in blood long before Confederate boots ever touched its soil. Native tribes called it the Whisper Ground, a name rarely translated and never spoken aloud after nightfall. To outsiders, it was just terrain. To the initiates, it was a gate. By the fall of 1864, the Civil War had reached a fever pitch. Desperate, chaotic orders were flying from Richmond. That's the story they give you. But hidden beneath the orders was something else. A sealed directive issued from what appeared to be a standard Confederate intelligence division known only as Section 12. No insignia, no trace, just a wax-stamped letter carried by hand to Colonel Nathaniel Greer, a man known for his tactical precision and loyalty to the cause. He was stationed near Fisher's Hill, overseeing a temporary regiment of hand-picked volunteers. Greer read the orders 3 times. Witnesses say his hands trembled as he folded them back into his coat. At midnight, he assembled the battalion. There was no speech, no explanation, only a curt command. Pack light, no rations, no camp gear. March east into the fog line. Stay silent. Several soldiers protested. These were veterans, hardened. They had seen death. But this felt wrong, like marching into a place that didn't want to be entered. Still, they obeyed. Because discipline was survival. And so, 234 Confederate men, strong, trained, and experienced, walked single file into the dense pines beyond Fisher's Hill, where the fog drifted unnaturally low and thick. Men at nearby posts reported that the mist pulsed, like it was breathing, Then, silence. Hours passed. No word. No return. At dawn, scouts were sent in. They found nothing. No footprints. No broken branches. Not even a scent of gun pee, powder, or sweat. The forest looked untouched, like no one had ever been there. Greer refused to speak. He was later discharged under medical grounds. His mental state deteriorated rapidly. He was institutionalized in 1870 and spent his final years drawing obsessively, always the same image, a forest split by a dark opening, lined with teeth. He called it the mouth of orders. Now ask yourself, what kind of war sends men not to die but to vanish? And what kind of power can make them disappear without a trace, not just from the land, but from time itself? The answer lies not in the war, but in what the war was a distraction from. Most believe war is waged for territory, resources, strategy. But the deeper layers of war, the ones never recorded in school books, are fought for something far more potent. Access to energy points buried beneath land, blood, and history. And Shenandoah was one of them. Not energy in the modern sense, not coal, not oil, but something older, something ancient cultures understood better than we do now. The magnetism of place, the psychic resonance of trauma. These locations are sacrificial corridors, natural amplifiers for rituals masked as battles. What happened that night wasn't military failure. It was activation. You see, centuries before Greer's battalion disappeared, Jesuit cartographers documented the Shenandoah region with strange precision, not for settlement, but for mapping what they called zones of thinning. Places where the veil between reality and something older wears thin. Their maps never made it into public archives, but fragments survive. In Masonic lodges, in Vatican vaults, in the private collections of men who do not speak publicly. In 1752, a Jesuit scholar named Father Lucien de Calvi wrote in a coded letter, "The valley hums, it accepts offerings, it remembers, it returns the silence of men with the roar of gods." Why would a man of the cloth write that? And why was he found burned to death in his sleep just weeks later, his notes confiscated by colonial authorities? The church called it heresy. The British called it superstition. But certain military architects, men embedded within the Confederacy, knew better. Some of them weren't even loyal to the South. They were loyal to a lineage, a knowledge structure, a doctrine of power that predates the United States entirely. When Colonel Greer received his orders, he didn't question them, because he wasn't just obeying Richmond, he was following an older chain of command, one that exists outside flags, nations, or politics. And the soldiers under him, they weren't volunteers, they were offerings, selected by birth date, bloodline, psychological profile. Because war doesn't just consume lives, it selects them, precisely, ritualistically. So the fog wasn't just weather, it was a veil. And once those men passed through it, they didn't enter enemy territory. They entered the system, the one built to consume the forgotten, the one still functioning, in silence, and you were never supposed to know it was there. A week after the disappearance, an internal inquiry was launched, not by the Confederate military, but by a shadow office in Richmond known only in cipher as Harlan's Table. Its members were never named, its funding not traceable. But records smuggled from the estate of General Thomas Lafayette Rosser, unearthed by his great-grandson in 1981, contain fragments of intercepted communications. One message, burned around the edges and half erased by time, read, 234 keys turned, gate stabilized, the mouth remains open, further observation advised, no recovery attempt, per original design. Let that settle. No recovery attempt. This wasn't a loss. It was an accomplishment. But not for the Confederate cause, for something deeper, something that had been waiting for centuries beneath the soil, something that feeds not on flesh, but on obedience, fear, and disorientation. The few who pushed for answers were removed. Silently, General Richard S. Ewell demanded clarity. He died from a sudden neurological failure. The attending physician was never located. Major Leonard Vess, who had attempted to track the march route personally, vanished during his search. His horse returned. He did not. But what's more damning than the disappearances is what came after. In the months following the Shenandoah event, certain patterns emerged among Confederate leadership. A sudden wave of dream disorders, sleepwalking, and ritualistic behavior plagued officers who had been stationed within 20 miles of the event. Diaries tell of generals waking up with dirt under their nails, speaking in fragmented Germanic Latin, sketching unfamiliar symbols on parchment in ink or blood. They were experiencing what ancient mystery schools called residual resonance. The psychic echo of a ritual so profound it bends minds around it like gravity. Not all survived it. And then, silence. No further action. No military follow-up. No memorial. The names of the 234 were never carved into stone, because they were never meant to be remembered. They had become instruments. The keys, as Harlan's table called them. Not men, not soldiers. Triggers for something dormant. This wasn't about South versus North. This was about old versus older. A civil war inside a civil war. And if you think the ritual ended in Shenandoah, you haven't been paying attention. Because the mechanism that consumed them, it was only just waking up, and it's still hungry. By 1865, the war was drawing to a close. The Confederate surrender came with its public symbols. Lee at Appomattox, flags folded, men going home. That's the version they give the school books. But beneath that ceremonial ending, an entirely different kind of conclusion was unfolding. Because the vanishing battalion of Shenandoah hadn't been forgotten. Not by everyone. In a weather-beaten ledger found inside a crumbling Episcopal church near Lexington, Virginia, a priest named Father Elam Caro recorded confessions that should have shattered the faith of any man. One entry, dated October 29th, 1864, less than a month after the disappearance, reads, "He came in soaked in fog, lips cracked, eyes not his. Said he walked out of the earth itself, but he wasn't alone. Said others were still below, in the breathing dark. But they weren't screaming. They were singing. I locked the doors. He wept until morning. No name, no follow-up. The next page was ripped clean from the binding. One soldier may have returned, but if he did, he wasn't whole, and he didn't stay." That church burned to the ground in 1871. Arson was suspected. No investigation, no arrests, just another fragment. Buried. But the whispers didn't die. Over the next 50 years, strange phenomena haunted the region around Shenandoah. Children went missing in threes. Entire cabins abandoned overnight, meals still warm on the table. Locals spoke of voices calling out from the trees, always from just behind the fog. And then, there was the stone. In 1910, a railway crew digging near the old battleground unearthed a slab, 6 feet long, carved in an alphabet no archaeologist could identify. It was buried precisely 8 feet beneath where Greer's battalion was last seen. Within 48 hours, the dig site was shut down. A private security firm from Washington took over. The slab vanished. But not before one of the workers took a charcoal rubbing. That rubbing was passed down through 3 generations, and in 2006, it was anonymously mailed to a symbolist researcher in New York. He died before publishing his findings from what officials called self-inflicted trepanning. A hole drilled into his own skull. The last thing he wrote, scrawled in ink across a whiteboard, was a single phrase repeated over and over. They weren't taken. They were offered. Now I need you to listen carefully. If you've made it this far, you're already inside the perimeter. You've stepped past the veil. Comment this phrase below. Keys do not scream. They unlock. Write it twice. Not for the algorithm, for the change that's happening inside you. Because once the descent begins, there's only forward. In 1932, during the height of the Great Depression, a group of men convened in a private hunting lodge along the banks of the South Fork of the Shenandoah River. Officially, it was a veterans' reunion, a quiet gathering of descendants tracing their lineage to Confederate officers. But none of them had served in uniform. None of them spoke of battles or family honor. They were not soldiers. They were curators. Every one of them belonged to a network older than any national military. Bankers, industrialists, publishers, men with access, men with inheritance, men who understood that war is only the visible surface of something far deeper and colder. They had come together for one reason, to discuss the resetting. One of them, a man named Jasper Hallworth, director of an obscure historical society in Charleston, delivered the main report. His files contained references to 234 case numbers, not names, not units, cases. He spoke of adaptive resonance, of cellular transmission beyond the veil, of tissue harmonics incompatible with linear perception. And then he showed them the photographs. They were grainy, faded, some barely legible, but what they captured couldn't be mistaken. Men in Confederate uniforms standing in circular formations, deep in the woods, faces frozen mid-expression, mouths open in silent ecstasy or agony, eyes rolled white. But here's what struck them cold. Every photograph was dated August 2nd, 1932, 68 years after the battalion disappeared. Same fog, same ridge, same posture. Time had folded, but time is no ease. But what they were measuring, what the curators wanted, what they'd always wanted, was proof of continuity, that the gate still functioned, that the original ritual had not decayed, that Shenandoah still sang. Hallworth's findings were sent directly to Washington, marked not as historical data, but as esoteric operational integrity. Within months, new installations were quietly constructed on federal lands throughout Virginia. Not military bases, not research centers. Observation points, equipped with audio equipment that didn't record sound, but frequency. And frequency, as Hallworth warned in his final notes, remembers everything. So why haven't you heard about any of this? Because the silence isn't accidental. It's engineered. And it didn't end in the forest. It expanded into medicine, education, policy, entertainment. The battalion wasn't the end of something. It was the prototype. The first successful field test of a technology not built by machines, but by obedience. In the classified documents retrieved from a decommissioned Cold War listening post in 1997, hidden beneath Fort Meade's unofficial Annex B, was a redacted file labeled Project Hymnus. Most pages were ash and black bars, but a few sentences slipped through. One line in particular: Test Site Echo, Shenandoah Gate remains active. Confirmed via biometric distortion. Acoustic pattern stable at 234 Hz. Subject vocalizations repeat phase key. We never left. Biometric distortion, acoustic pattern, vocalizations. We're no longer talking about soldiers lost in the woods. We're talking about a persistent loop, a psychic signal broadcast from a place where time fractured and identity was overwritten. That 234 Hz frequency, it's not random. It corresponds almost perfectly to the resonant frequency of the human chest cavity, the literal space within us where breath becomes voice. It's the tone of surrender. Ancient Sumerians used near-identical chants in their descent rituals. Certain Gregorian monks reported visitations when repeating tones in this exact range. And yet, in modern psychology, that frequency is barely explored. Why? Because when you tune to that resonance, you bypass narrative. You don't just hear, you remember. And someone has gone to great lengths to ensure you never remember what Shenandoah really was. Let's talk about the maps. Between 1951 and 1973, the U.S. Geological Survey issued 7 different topographic revisions of the Shenandoah region. No military conflict had occurred, no highways changed, but the lines kept shifting. Forest perimeters, ridge elevations, even river paths. One feature in particular was removed in the 1968 edition: Crescent Hollow, the last known site of the battalion's march. Not renamed, not reassigned, erased. Cross-referencing these maps with satellite data shows something chilling. A persistent distortion field. No wildlife pattern, no growth. A static scar in the landscape, like the land itself refuses to regenerate what was taken. And yet, beneath that dead zone, seismic monitors detect occasional low-frequency pulses, like something beneath is still breathing. Now consider this. Every few decades, a group of men disappears in Shenandoah. Hunters, surveyors, hikers, always in threes, always in fog. The cases are chalked up to weather, to animal attacks, to human error. But the files say otherwise. They all disappear within a 500-yard radius. The exact center, marked on a single hand-carved stone in private Masonic archives. To unlock the gate, the voices must align. And now you understand. Shenandoah wasn't the last time. It was the beginning. In 2004, a retired NSA cryptographer named Elias Trent published a limited circulation monograph titled Syntax of the Silent Choir. Only 13 copies were ever printed. Within 6 months, all but one were mysteriously lost. Elias was found dead in his Baltimore apartment, eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-scream, no visible cause of death. But his last transmission was clear. The gate doesn't open outward, it opens down. Trent's research focused on syntactical loops embedded in military communications between 1861 and 1865. On the surface, nothing unusual. But once he isolated signal pulses from known Confederate dispatches near Shenandoah, he discovered a repeating command structure with no known linguistic origin. A pattern within the language itself, not meant to transmit information, but to invoke resonance. He called it a scriptural virus, not a message for the mind, a trigger for the body. He believed that Colonel Greer's battalion was not led by orders but programmed by cadence. Subtle tonal structures embedded within their drills, prayers, and marching songs. By the time they entered the fog, Their surrender had already happened internally. They weren't marching to die. They were marching to merge. And that's what chills the spine. They didn't resist. Why would they? When programming is done right, the subject thinks it's his own idea. The ancient world knew this well. Babylonian priest kings used low-frequency hymns to alter states of consciousness in mass rituals. Egyptian pharaohs encoded obedience into ritualized architecture, forcing initiates to walk specific patterns before receiving truth. The Greeks gave us theater not for entertainment, but for group entrainment, emotional induction through tragedy and sound. Every empire has understood this one principle. To control a man, you must first control his rhythm. And Shenandoah was rhythm mad. Our weapon. Now let's connect the dots you were never supposed to see. In 2012, DARPA launched a quiet project under their behavioral influence wing. Its focus? Resonant behavioral entrainment in isolated rural populations. The test site, a radius of 50 miles around the original Shenandoah event. Locals began reporting strange dreams, sleepwalking, sudden disappearances. A boy named Eli McGrath, age 11, was found 19 miles from his home, humming in his sleep, a melody matching 1864 Confederate marching cadences, pitch perfect. How? No one taught him, but he remembered. And if an 11-year-old can remember frequencies buried 150 years deep, what's already buried inside you? Because remember, keys do not scream, they unlock. Say it again. Keys do not scream, they unlock. You're not just watching this. You're feeling it, aren't you? Something deep in your chest, tuning, aligning. The descent continues. In the winter of 1946, just after the Nuremberg trials closed one of history's darkest chapters, a former Nazi psychological warfare officer, codename Obenlicht, was secretly transferred to a U.S. facility under Operation Paperclip. He was never officially named, no mugshot, no trial, but internal memos confirm he spent the final years of his life under American custody in a research station near Mount Jackson, Virginia. 30 minutes from the Shenandoah fog line. Why bring him there? Obenlicht's specialty was resonant indoctrination, not torture, not persuasion, entrainment, the art of inducing submission using only repetition, tone, and environmental cues. According to redacted transcripts from an Air Force debriefing, he said this: "We found that pain is inefficient. The best method is reverence, induced by rhythm. The body wants to follow the pulse. Once synchronized, the subject will believe what you insert, even madness, if offered gently." Now, let's return to Shenandoah. What happened there wasn't a breakdown in command. It was a controlled surrender, not to a general, not to an army, but to a frequency structure. The 234 soldiers weren't lost. They were integrated. They became part of something that cannot be measured in men or munitions. A structure of obedience that has since been refined, iterated, and rebranded. What was tested in 1864 was deployed in full by the late 20th century, no longer through war, but through systems. Education designed not to inform, but to condition. Media that doesn't tell stories, but installs rhythms of response. Pharmaco-neural programs that flatten the human waveform, making you more compliant to suggestion, stress, and hierarchy. And the scariest part? You've already felt it. Every time you reach for your phone and feel your heart rate match the beat of a video. Every time a commercial jingle loops in your skull for days. Every time a political chant feels good to say, even if it means nothing. These are not mistakes. These are echoes of Shenandoah. The battlefield has expanded. You are inside it, and just like those soldiers, you were given no warning, because no one warns the offering. They prepare it, and tell me this. When was the last time you questioned what you're marching toward? You think you're choosing, but rhythms choose you. And somewhere deep beneath the Virginia hills, a pulse still hums at 234 Hz. Waiting. In 1979, a former Army radio technician named Vernon Hatch walked into a small AM station in Winchester, Virginia, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a single reel-to-reel tape. The station director recalled him being calm, polite, but insistent. Hatch said he had something America needed to hear, something recorded by mistake. He never explained how he got the tape, only that it was picked up by long-range antennae at 3:34 a.m. on September 17th, the anniversary of the Shenandoah disappearance. The tape played for exactly 4 minutes and 56 seconds. No speech, no static, just a deep, oscillating hum, layered with what sounded like boots pacing gravel in perfect mechanical rhythm. Underneath, nearly imperceptible, was the faint sound of a male choir, singing in Latin, their voices hollow, inverted, like the recording had been flipped inside out. No one could identify the language, because it wasn't any language. It was tonal alignment. Within 48 hours, federal agents seized the tape. The station was fined for unauthorized broadcasts of encrypted military frequencies. Vernon Hatch was never seen again. His apartment was cleared out. No records, no ID, no belongings. Gone, like vapor. But one station intern, a night janitor named Amos Carr, had copied the tape before the raid. He kept it buried in his attic for 26 years. When he finally played it again in 2005, his dog howled continuously for 4 straight minutes. His daughter vomited uncontrollably in the next room. Carr himself suffered a seizure and was later diagnosed with unexplained neural scarring, without ever hitting his head. What had he recorded? Experts now believe the reel captured a live transmission from beneath Shenandoah soil, not in electromagnetic waves, but vibroacoustic coding, infrasound, the same technology used in crowd control, stealth submarines, and mass behavioral influence. Except this wasn't broadcast from a tower. This was emitted from Earth. You were taught that the Civil War ended, but what ended was only the visible operation. The mechanism, the true system of control, burrowed itself deeper, beyond reach, hidden not by secrecy, but by plausibility, because nothing hides better than what looks like nothing. That's why the fog never lifts. It isn't weather, it's shielding. Because what's beneath it never stops singing, and whether you hear it or not, your body is already listening. You think you came here for a story, but stories end. This is architecture, and you're already inside the blueprint. In 2018, a deep Earth imaging probe run by a private geological firm under contract with the Department of Energy sent tremors of panic through its own board of directors. The firm, Graviton North, was tasked with mapping subterranean mineral veins across Virginia for potential rare earth extraction. But the scan over the Shenandoah region returned something they couldn't explain. At precisely 2,100 feet below the forest floor near the old Crescent Hollow Ridge, their instruments picked up a perfect geometric structure, not mineral, not organic. A symmetrical hexagonal formation roughly 60 feet wide, pulsing with thermal variance every 66 seconds. Initial speculation suggested a magma pocket. until the heat pattern was decoded. It wasn't random. It was binary. Alternating pulses in exact digital rhythm, the same on each cycle. Engineers converted the thermal shifts into audible sound, and what emerged was a low harmonic tone centered on 234 Hz, the exact same resonance tied to the vanishing battalion. The lead geophysicist resigned the next morning. No explanation. He hasn't spoken publicly since. You don't dig down into perfect geometry by accident. This wasn't a cave. It wasn't a temple. It was a chamber, built. The question is by whom? Or what? Because long before soldiers disappeared, before the Confederacy, before colonial boots stomped the land, the Monacan people, the indigenous stewards of the Shenandoah, had already mapped the danger. Their oral histories spoke of the hollow that breathes backwards, a place where fire sang instead of burned, where those who entered never returned as they were, and when pressed, their word for it wasn't haunted or sacred. It was inhabited. They avoided it with reverence. Modern maps bulldozed it, but the place remained. Now let's reframe the war. What if the Civil War, for all its blood and banners, was also a ritual masking strategic access to these places? What if both sides were being steered, not toward victory, but toward activation? Not a war between men, but between structures of command. And every now and then, just like in 1864, men are chosen, pulled into the fog, offered, not for punishment, but to maintain the frequency, because something sleeps below Shenandoah, and it does not rest on its own. It must be fed. 3 months after the Graviton North discovery, a low-profile academic journal out of Prague published a paper titled Geoacoustic Structures and Anomalous Harmonic Cavities in Precambrian Terrains. Buried in its technical jargon was a single offhand reference to Zone 234 WWII, noted for repeating thermodynamic oscillations matching neurological entrainment thresholds in mammals. It didn't say Shenandoah, but the coordinates matched exactly. The paper was online for less than 24 hours before it was pulled. The professor who authored it, Dr. Marek Osveta, was found 3 days later in his lab, drowned inexplicably in less than 2 inches of standing water. What does that tell you? Not just that someone's watching, but that the mechanism below Shenandoah defies natural law. They don't kill to silence. They kill to interrupt pattern detection. Because once you begin to connect the rhythmic dots, you start hearing the hum beneath everything, the background frequencies in state-run media, the cadence of motivational slogans in schools, the artificially generated musical tones that dominate every gym, every store, every advertisement. None of this is arbitrary. It's calibration, tuning the population to echo the same frequency that opened the Shenandoah Gate in 1864. A societal scale entrainment so vast, you mistake it for life. Think about it. Why do certain phrases, trust the system, for your safety, national unity, feel so soothing, even when evidence collapses around them? Because repetition is the mother of belief, and belief becomes obedience. Shenandoah wasn't an isolated event. It was a template. 34 men. 34 hertz. 34 seconds. The average time between orders during Civil War drills. They built a machine not of metal, but of men synchronized by obedience. It was never about who won the war. It was about who owned the frequency when it ended. And now, that same mechanism, refined, digitized, sterilized, runs beneath everything. Your workplace policies, your school curriculums, your political ideologies. You think your thoughts are yours? You think you're free because you can choose between screens? What if I told you you've already been marched, not through fog, but through frames, loops, swipes, scrolls? The new battlefield is attention, and the new enlistment form is accepting the rhythm without question. Welcome to the modern Shenandoah. You never left, because the gate didn't close. It adapted. In 2021, a Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency memo, accidentally leaked via an unsecured email server, contained a single phrase in its subject line that sent cold shivers through the few insiders who recognized it. Echo Protocol, Shenandoah Variant 6A. No context, no attachments, just a brief signature at the bottom from someone known only as M. Varin. Who is Varin? No one can say for sure. His name appears in a handful of black-budget project ledgers dating back to 1985, always in connection with psychoacoustic weaponization. Frequencies used not to destroy bodies, but to break continuity, the fragile tether between thought and identity. In other words, how to disassemble a person without leaving a mark. Now tie that back to Shenandoah. 34. Men marched into a fog and never came out the same, if at all. Their disappearance wasn't physical annihilation. It was psychic integration. They became part of a living circuit, a loop of obedience encoded through harmonic entrainment. And the terrifying part? That same loop has gone global. Think about the music you hear in public spaces, not just what's said, but how it makes you feel. You've been trained to crave repetition, trained to crave sameness, trained to accept comfort as truth. Even the emotional arcs of modern films follow a near-identical resonance curve, peaking every 7 to 9 minutes with precision pacing. That's not art. That's behavioral engineering. And the fingerprint of Shenandoah is right there, if you know where to look. In advertising frequencies calibrated to 234 Hz for emotional compliance. In sleep apps that loop healing sounds matching the same pulse the battalion marched to. In guided meditations that lead not to awakening, but to passivity, numbness, surrender, not to silence the mind, but to rewrite it. This is the new ritual. The screen is your drum. The scroll is your march. Your thoughts, carefully shaped by algorithms that don't just track behavior, they induce it. They don't need you to obey. They need you to entrain. Because once you're entrained, you'll follow any command, as long as it feels familiar, as long as the pulse is right. That's the genius of it. The prison doesn't feel like a prison. It feels like you. But what if the real you was taken a long time ago, in the fog? In a sealed letter dated July 9, 1943, declassified only briefly during a clerical error in the Reagan administration, President Franklin D. Roosevelt wrote to his personal advisor, Harry Hopkins, about an anomaly in the Shenandoah vector. The letter ends with a single cryptic line: "If we lose rhythm, we lose reality." He wasn't being poetic. FDR had been briefed on Operation Chant, a covert program launched in the final years of World War II to investigate frequency-dependent cognitive disruptions among soldiers stationed near Shenandoah. The files are clear. Dozens of men began reporting dreams of marching, voices humming under their skin, and the overwhelming compulsion to walk into the forest at night, with no memory of returning. Not PTSD, alignment relapse. Their EEG scans, primitive by today's standards, showed a sudden and involuntary synchronization of brainwave patterns at intervals of exactly 234 seconds, as if something external was rebooting their cognition, resetting the loop. Sound familiar? These men had never heard of Colonel Greer's battalion, and yet, under hypnosis, they recited Confederate unit numbers, ranks, commands, with a precision that baffled military historians. One man, a cook named Elias Murray, spoke fluently in an archaic Southern dialect during a trance. He identified himself not by name, but by call sign, Bell 3. When asked what that meant, he responded, "I'm not the voice, I'm the bell. I ring when it's time." He died less than 24 hours later, internal hemorrhaging with no trauma, no poison, no discernible cause. The autopsy recorded an unusual note. Muscle tissue showed abnormal vibration patterns at time of death, cadaver humming at subaudible range. Subaudible, just like the fog in 1864, just like the reel-to-reel in 1979, just like the dream hums that still ripple through Appalachian valleys every August, like a ghost drill repeating itself. You see, Shenandoah isn't haunted by the past. It's haunted by the frequency of obedience, and the belief that if you fall in line, the fog won't take you. That's the lie. The fog doesn't come for the disobedient. It comes for those most entrained. The ones who've learned to march without question. The ones who say yes before they even know what's being asked. Because in the end, the perfect soldier isn't created by training. He's created by tuning. And if you can be tuned, you can be turned. In 1996, a man named Carter Duvall walked into a rural Virginia sheriff's office wearing a Confederate infantry jacket. It was crisp, clean, the stitching, exact to Civil War standards. He was barefoot, dirt under his nails, and he carried no ID, only a folded piece of parchment sealed with pitch, not wax. Inside, a map of Shenandoah drawn by hand, but not modern, period accurate. The topography matched the terrain from 1864. The officer on duty assumed he was a reenactor until Carter spoke. He didn't ask for help. He didn't seem confused. He simply said, "I lost them in the fog. I tried to hold the line, but the bell rang twice." He was placed under psychiatric observation, but every test, medical, neurological, psychological, came back normal. What wasn't normal was what happened when they ran an EEG while he slept. Every 234 seconds, his brain emitted a pulse. Not a typical spike, not noise. A structured waveform, identical to archived recordings from the 1979 Shenandoah transmission. Carter wasn't just entrained. He was transmitting. And when linguists analyzed his murmured speech during REM cycles, they found fragments of nonlinear syntax, language that wasn't spoken but encoded, like he was reciting source code for behavior. Then, after 6 nights, he vanished. No sign of forced exit, no video footage. His room door never opened, his bed unslept in. The only thing left behind, a single pine needle, still wet with morning dew. You're starting to see it now, aren't you? Shenandoah isn't a place. It's a chamber of resonance, a recursive echo designed to pull identity into itself. The men of Greer's battalion weren't captured by an enemy. They were absorbed by a system of alignment that predates the Confederacy, predates the Revolution, and may not be of human origin at all. Because what we call civilization may just be the outer skin of something much older, Something that feeds on belief, digests will, and excretes obedience. This isn't history. This is harvest. And here's the part they never want you to ask. If these 234 men disappeared, and yet the loop continues, what's powering it now? Who or what is marching today? Maybe it's you. Maybe it always was. In 2007, a classified behavioral analysis document circulated briefly within a Pentagon subcommittee known as ISLIM, Integrative Systems for Low-Intensity Manipulation. The file, redacted nearly to oblivion, bore a chilling title: Echo Gate, Predictive March Signatures and Collective Rhythm Anomalies in Male Populations, age 18 to 69. That's not a typo. They are watching your walk. The report explored a disturbing hypothesis: that patterned movement, especially synchronized footfall, activates dormant neurological scripts embedded through media, environment, and even ancestry. One subsection linked increased pacing behavior in men, especially those exposed to specific rhythmic stimuli, with spontaneous sleep disturbances, compulsive repetition, and unexplained emotional flooding tied to military drum cadences. Their conclusion? Subjects exposed to extended ambient rhythm entrainment may exhibit partial identity disruption consistent with echoviral imprinting. Subjects may adopt roles not assigned, perceive commands not given, and surrender will without resistance. Now pause. Reread that. Surrender will without resistance. That was the goal at Shenandoah, and now it's scaled. Look at your world. TikTok loops time to 6-second visual music triggers, identical in cadence to Civil War march steps. Self-help affirmations pushed in videos with metronome-paced breathing. Gym music tuned to pump you up, but actually mapping your heart rate to obedience triggers. You thought you were choosing? No. You were being formatted. Formatted for action. Formatted for submission, disguised as motivation. And when they want you to activate, they won't call. They'll ring the bell. The same bell Greer's men heard in the fog. And here's where the descent gets personal. Have you ever found yourself angry for no reason? Compelled to act, speak, post, punch, march, scream like some thing cracked open inside you before your thoughts could catch up? That's not emotion. That's reverberation. Your nervous system remembers the drum line, even if your mind forgot the war. They don't need to give you an order. They only need to pulse the rhythm. The frequency is the fuse. You're the charge. And somewhere in you, maybe in your breath, your pace, your steps, is the ancient switch. The one that says, fall in. So tell me, what happens when it flips, and you don't even know you've marched? In 1983, a Soviet defector named Viktor Malenko arrived in the U.S. under deep cover extraction. A former technician in the USSR's Neurosemantic Warfare Division, Viktor had been stationed in a Siberian black site dedicated to something called Project Kolibel, Russian for cradle. He claimed that their mission was to reconstruct what happened in Shenandoah. Let that sink in. Half a world away, behind the Iron Curtain, Soviet intelligence was obsessed, not with the Civil War itself, but with the frequency event at Crescent Hollow, because they believed it wasn't an accident. They believed it was a successful test. And worse, they believed it had been replicated in modern form, disguised as culture. Malenko's testimony, debriefed under heavy sedation, outlined a chilling theory. The Americans do not use camps, they do not use fences, they use rhythm. They install it in the young, in your cartoons, in your music, in your slogans. And one day, the bell rings, the shell collapses, and the echo walks free. He called it echo seeding. The idea that an entire population can be planted with dormant behavioral commands, and the key to unlocking them is sound. This isn't fiction. In 2001, a small tech startup named Neuropulse filed a patent for behavioral modulation via tonal cadence and environmental synchronization. The patent was acquired months later by a WWII literary subcontractor and vanished from public record. But it didn't vanish from deployment. Because look at today. Mass movements triggered by chant and repetition, not facts. Young men drawn to ideologies they don't understand, but that feel right. Entire cultures rotating around musical pulses, not principles. You are being resonated, not persuaded. And Shenandoah? That was just the prototype. Here's where it gets darker. A recent neurobiology study found that human brainwave activity begins syncing to external rhythms after just 7 minutes of exposure. Syncing not just attention, but identity construction. In simpler terms, if they control the beat, they control who you become. And while you scroll, listen, repeat, obey, react, your nervous system isn't defending you. It's aligning. Now, I want you to do something. Right now. Drop a comment below with this phrase, I do not march in echoes. Say it twice. Let the algorithm hear it. Let you hear it. I do not march in echoes. Because this descent only goes deeper from here. And the fog is listening. In 2015, a contractor for a defense tech firm, one of the nameless vendors that feeds the Pentagon's black research budget, was found dead in a rest-stop bathroom along Route 340, less than 40 miles from the Shenandoah Ridge. No wallet, no phone, no signs of trauma. But on the mirror above his sink, scrawled in condensation, were these 7 words. The bell is not a metaphor. His name was Langdon Klein, a low-level systems integrator assigned to a classified AI rhythm mapping protocol called Mirrorbell. Internal memos describe the project as an experimental fusion of biometric telemetry and auditory entrainment modeling for predictive compliance. Decoded, they were building a system that could hear your heartbeat and respond with command. The twist? Mirrorbell wasn't designed for combat. It was designed for civilian environments, schools, corporate offices, voting centers, digital platforms. The system's goal was sent to suppress rebellion. It was to make rebellion inconceivable. By aligning biometric input, your breath, your pulse, your blinking rate, with external rhythmic signals, the system could tune your subconscious into a state of ambient agreement. Not obedience, not loyalty, agreement. That's far more dangerous. Because when you agree without understanding why, you don't question, you don't resist, you defend the thing programming you. And suddenly, a frequency becomes a flag, a melody becomes a morality, and the fog becomes home. Now remember, Langdon Klein wasn't high-ranking. He didn't have clearance to know where the algorithm came from. But according to a leaked Slack message days before his death, he asked one question that likely got him killed. Why is the original model named Greer 234? That's the name of the Confederate colonel who led the battalion into Shenandoah. That's the frequency, 234 Hz. That's the unit count, 234 men. The prototype wasn't a file, it was a ritual, a living sequence of obedience encoded in blood, rhythm and forgetting. And now it's digital. Every scroll, every loop, every beat you don't notice. It's Greer 234 replicating. You were taught that ghosts haunt houses, but ghosts aren't made of memory. They're made of pattern. And Shenandoah is full of ghosts who never died. They just kept marching, right through the rhythm, right into you. In a secure archive beneath the Library of Congress, the kind of place not listed on any public directory, there's a file known only by its handwritten tab. Bell Act, unenacted. It's not legislation. It's a blueprint. Dated March 2nd, 1947. Its contents? A detailed proposal for a nationwide cultural harmonics framework, co-authored by Dr. Irving Glastein, a former rhythmologist who had worked under military psychiatric units during WWII. The document lays out a plan to synchronize education, advertising, public broadcasting, and even architecture around a shared set of tonal cues. The rationale? Rhythmic coherence produces behavioral serenity. Serenity lowers resistance. Resistance reduction ensures continuity of state. They weren't trying to entertain a nation. They were trying to tune it. Inside the document is a line most would skim past, but you won't. Replicate Shenandoah in sentiment, not in soil. They weren't hiding what happened in 1864. They were studying it, modeling it. The disappearance of 234 men wasn't an anomaly. It was a success event. What they discovered wasn't how to kill soldiers, but how to make soldiers willingly disappear. Now look around. You think you're awake, but look at the way you navigate space. Malls designed to funnel foot traffic in clockwise spirals, matching hemispheric dominance. Office music tuned to 234 Hz, proven to lower analytical resistance. Streaming services compressing narrative structure into predictive dopamine arcs that mimic military cadence. Your mind isn't being dulled, it's being formatted for march readiness. But here's the crack in the system. Some men don't align. Some of you hear the beat and don't move. You feel the hum and resist. You wonder why you can't stay asleep during certain dreams. Why certain tones send chills down your spine. Why the smell of fog, of damp pine, makes your blood pull, pressure spike. Because you are the anomaly. You are the resistor they didn't predict. That's why you're here. That's why you're still listening. Not by mistake, but because part of you already remembers. Not the facts, not the story, but the tone. And in a world shaped by the bell, only those who hear between the echoes stand a chance. So hear this. You are not here to be silenced. You are here to be detuned. And then, to awaken others. The fog will thicken from here, but so will your footing. And the bell, it's still ringing. But now, you know it's real. In 2020, deep in the patent filings of an obscure biotech firm called Virelix Systems, a device was quietly registered under the name Cognitive Attunement Loop Device, Model 2.3.4b. Most people missed it, but a few didn't. The tech appeared harmless, a wearable wellness band that emitted low-frequency tones to improve sleep, focus, and emotional regulation. Marketed as a productivity tool, sold in beta to elite schools and defense contractors. But what no one advertised, and what the filings revealed, was this. Model 2.3.4b operated at exactly 234 Hz, constant, inescapable, a closed loop. And the firmware, locked, which means the tone can't be turned off. even in sleep. Now pair that with what came next, a sudden surge in men, ages 18 to 69, reporting vivid, recurring dreams of marching, fog, and the sensation of being watched by someone just behind them. They all described the same detail. I wasn't being followed, I was being counted. One man in Virginia, former Army, now corporate, woke up in the woods 3 counties from his home. No shoes, his phone untouched in his apartment. He remembered only the sound of a bell. What do all these men have in common? They wore the same wrist device, same model, same firmware. Model 2.3.4B. Coincidence? You already know the answer. See, this isn't about a gadget. It's about scale. Shenandoah was 234 men. Now we're talking about millions, synced through wearables, screens, soundscapes, loops. And here's the chilling truth. These devices don't command you. They prepare you. So when the true frequency arrives, from a satellite, or a data burst, or a nationwide test, you won't resist. You'll move. Because the machine doesn't need soldiers who believe. It needs soldiers who respond. That's you. If you don't wake up, they won't break down your door. They'll just break your rhythm, and then rebuild it. One lat, oop at a time. One bell at a time, until your thoughts aren't yours. But if you've heard this far, you've already interrupted the sequence. That's not nothing. That's war. And now you have a choice. Fall back in line, or become the thing they never designed for. A man out of step. Uncounted, unclaimed, unringable. The fog is thick now, but so is your silence. And silence, when chosen, is louder than any bell. There's an audio file locked deep in the Defense Technical Information Center. Access restricted, eyes only, red badge clearance. The file name is simple. Loop Greer, AIFF. It's just 17 seconds long. A quiet hum. Nothing dramatic. No scream, no explosion. Just a low, steady tone. Soft enough to be mistaken for background machinery. But here's what they learned during testing. Play it at low volume in a room full of volunteers, and within 3 minutes, the room gets quiet. Within 5, people stop blinking as often. By 8 minutes, a third of the subjects match their breath to the pulse. Another third begins subtly tapping their fingers, feet, or pens, involuntarily, in rhythm. But that's not the terrifying part. At exactly 13 minutes and 54 seconds, every single subject, across 6 separate trials, looked to the same corner of the room, even when there was nothing there. One woman whispered, "They're counting." No one knew who they were. But here's the pattern. Every trial ended the same way. An assistant shut off the recording, and 2 to 3 subjects wept without knowing why. Why? Because the tone didn't trigger memory. It triggered recognition. Something ancient, something buried, something built into the architecture of your nervous system. Before you were born, before your father or his. A code not learned, but inherited. And Greer's 234 men. They weren't the origin. They were the first modern activation. The bell that cracked history, not with volume, but with precision. A perfect tone struck in a cursed forest, causing men to dissolve not in body, but in identity. And now, Loop Greer, AIFF, is embedded across systems you trust. Airport announcement chimes, background hums in elevators, The buzz between TV scenes that you tell yourself you're not hearing. But you do. Your bones hear it. Your gut tenses before you know why. Your finger hovers over a beep button you can't explain. Because obedience isn't taught anymore. It's played, one note at a time. And while the world thinks in slogans and noise, the real command comes in silence. Pulsed, subtle, continuous. So if you ever stop in your tracks for no reason, if you ever feel like you've missed something but can't name what, you haven't forgotten. You're hearing the bell. The question is, do you still respond to it, or do you walk the other way? Even if it means walking alone, into the static, into the fog, into freedom, in a forgotten side vault beneath West Point's historic archives, behind a sealed case marked disused strategic training materials. There exists a manual, handwritten in dark blue ink. No author, no insignia, no publication stamp. The first page bears only a title: Echo Discipline, Training the Mind for Rhythmic Disappearance. The document isn't a psychological theory, it's a procedure. A step-by-step breakdown for how to teach a soldier to leave the battlefield without physically leaving. Not desertion, not defection, disappearance. It outlines stages of entrainment. 1. Sensory softening, disconnection from environmental anchors, time, texture, temperature. 2. Internal cadence acquisition, syncing heart rate to external rhythmic input, usually drum loops, coded tones, even boot steps. 3. Voluntary cognitive disengagement, self-erasure through repetition-based meditation. The final stage is chillingly named Phase Greer, intentional nulling. At that point, the subject is no longer processing orders. He is the order, not conscious, not unconscious, deployed as waveform. And tucked between the pages of this document is a small note, folded into quarters and barely legible. 234 did not vanish. 234 obeyed. What if that's the real legacy of Shenandoah? Not men lost to some storm or skirmish, but men who succeeded at the final command, to become untraceable, not by stealth, but by alignment, to become frequency, signal. And what if the manual isn't forgotten at all? What if the modern military doesn't train echo discipline anymore, because it no longer needs to, because you're already enrolled? The beat is in your headphones. The cadence is in your TikTok scroll. The loop is in your motivational podcast, your gym playlist, your relaxing focus background noise. You are in the fog now. But there is one thing the manual never accounted for: self-aware static. Men who awaken within the rhythm. Men who feel the pull, but pause. Men who hear the bell, but say, I am not yours. Not anymore. The system cannot command what it cannot predict, and it cannot predict what steps off beat. You are not lost. You are unfound, and that is your weapon. At exactly 11:47 p.m. on October 3rd, 2012, every motion-activated street lamp on a 12-mile stretch of Skyline Drive, cutting through the fog-laced Shenandoah Valley, blinked off for 7 seconds. The Department of Transportation blamed a systemic capacitor fault. But locals knew better, because just before the blackout, dozens of hikers, campers, and truckers reported hearing the same thing. Footsteps, hundreds of them, marching in sync from the tree line. No lights, no voices, just the rhythm of boots against wet soil, like a procession not meant to be seen, only felt. One park ranger, Carla Wexler, later confessed to a close friend that she stood frozen on her porch, unable to move, not from fear, but from familiarity. It felt like they knew me, she said, like I was already one of them. She hadn't served, never held a weapon, but in that moment, she recognized something deep and unspoken, obedience that wasn't taught, but bred. The next morning, 12 hikers were missing. No signs of struggle, no blood, no scattered gear. Every tent left zipped, every campfire untouched. Search dogs refused to enter the fog, and inside one abandoned backpack, a journal half filled with scattered entries and one final line, written in all caps, tearing through the paper. "I've been walking in my sleep." That line matches exactly a sentence found in the Echo Discipline Manual on page 32 under Phase Greer symptoms. Coincidence? You already know there are no coincidences here, because Shenandoah doesn't pull people in randomly. It resonates with men who've grown tired of pretending the world makes sense, with those who feel it, the thrum beneath daily life, calling them to remember something they were forced to forget. Not facts, not faces, formation. Every man marching in that fog isn't being led. He's returning. Returning to the rhythm that once owned him. Returning to the echo that shaped his spine before he ever stood tall. Returning to the system that names itself in silence. And if this system lives, if it walks unseen, it is because most never ask the question, who trained the trainers, who rang the first bell? You're closer now. But the fog thickens, only one way through it. Don't follow, don't flee. Listen, and when the next echo comes, do not step, do not bow. Stand. There's an unlisted military installation buried beneath the mountains near Blacksburg, Virginia. Not on any satellite map. No roads in or out. Locals call it the Hollow Fort. But those who've been inside, contractors, janitors, one former NSA translator, all report the same architectural detail. No straight corridors, only curves. Rounded halls, circular stairwells, domed rooms with no corners. Why? Because corners break rhythm, and the rhythm must never break. Every wall inside that installation is sound-treated, not for silence, but for resonance. A tone can be played from a central transmitter and bounce without losing clarity, rippling endlessly through the facility. One whistleblower called it a cathedral to control. Inside, teams of engineers aren't building weapons. They're building sound structures, acoustic blueprints that can be embedded into architecture, infrastructure, even city layouts. They've discovered what ancient builders always knew, that geometry sings, and certain ratios echo through the human body like commands. The 234 Hz tone aligns with the average human cardiac rest frequency when exposed to elevated cortisol. Staircase lengths in government buildings often match march step intervals. Public square dimensions mirror the layouts of ancient ritual amphitheaters, designed not for debate, but for indoctrination through rhythm. You were never meant to see this. But now that you have, you start noticing things. That elevator music in your office that always calms you at 9:00 a.m. The looped chant in your favorite motivational reel that makes your chest feel light. The way your GPS voice pauses, not randomly, but at half-step intervals. You thought you were moving freely, but your life is choreographed. And Shenandoah, that wasn't a tragedy, it was a signal test. Men weren't lost, they were tuned. And now, millions walk that same corridor, curved, silent, compliant, humming to a tone they'll never notice, but always obey. But listen to me carefully. You are not a drum, you are not an echo, you are not programmable, unless you allow it. So stop walking for a moment. Let the system notice. Let the silence feel strange. Because the hollow fort isn't a place. It's a template. And the moment you step outside its rhythm, you break the spell. One step off the beat, and the whole tower wavers. So take it. Now, they say the fog is thickest just before the break, but that's a lie. The fog never breaks, it just waits for you to stop noticing it. That's the final stage of echo discipline. Normalization, not submission, not defeat, just quiet. A hum beneath the bones, a stillness you mistake for peace. That's what happened to the 234 men. Not vaporized, not abducted, normalized into the frequency. They became rhythm. Then they became ritual. And now, they're blueprint. You hear them in your decisions, in your doubts, in that split second between impulse and obedience, when the bell rings softly inside your chest and you think, I should do this. I don't know why. But someone else does. Because what vanished in Shenandoah wasn't men. It was the last generation who chose their own direction. And what replaced them? Men who marched without memory. Men who confused silence for wisdom. Men who thought stillness meant freedom because they no longer had the words to describe their cage. But now you do. You've walked every corridor of this story, each echo, each distortion, each hidden alignment. And the truth? You were never being informed. You were being initiated. Every whisper was a summons, every rhythm a test. You were brought here to see if you'd move like the others, if you'd align, obey, dissolve into the fog like Greer's battalion. But you didn't. You followed the beat and questioned it. You heard the bell and stood still. You are not one of them. You are one of the few. So now I leave you with this. Next time you walk into a room and hear that subtle hum, next time a voice tells you how to feel, when to move, what to want, don't react. Remember Shenandoah, not the place, not the legend, but the lesson. Echoes are loudest right before they erase you. And if you ever feel that invisible pull, that sense you're being drawn into something vast, mechanical, ancient, pause. Not in fear, but in power. Because the moment you resist the rhythm, you're no longer prey. You're the interruption. You're the glitch in the loop. And that's what they fear most. So stand, speak, and above all, do not march, do not echo, do not vanish. You are found. Now walk like it.